Gender-based violence can take many forms. It can be physical violence, sexual, emotional, financial, digital, and there are many more, unfortunately. And regardless of immigration status or age or background, everyone has the right to live free from violence. There are many different types of violence, and people may experience more than one at any given time. It doesn't always look the way that we think it's going to look, and it can include things like touching in a sexual way without consent, forcing people to engage in sexual acts that they don't want to. It can include things like insulting, humiliating, or yelling at someone, hurting or threatening to hurt you or your family or even your pets. And it can also include things like taking your paycheck or your money without your permission, or withholding money that stops you from buying things that you or your children need, or even controlling your movements, your access to your family and friends, or even your passport. In Canada, these rights are protected under the law, and there are systems that are designed to provide immediate safety as well as long-term support for people. And abuse isn't just physical abuse. It doesn't have to look like yelling and punching and slapping. I mean, that's what we think of, but more often than not, abuse is really insidious. It's like coercive control. It's these little acts and manipulations that impact how somebody acts and behaves in a certain way, and tries to limit their actions and change their actions. And that it's not always abuse, but oftentimes it does cross the line, and people don't recognize it because it doesn't look like that more traditional type of abuse that you think of. And it's really dangerous for people to live in those situations. And as you said, they don't want to leave. They don't want to jeopardize their kids, their pets. They don't know what they'll do for money. Where will they live? There are all of these things, and oftentimes that person may control who they talk to and what support and help that they have available to them. So let's talk about what legal protections exist if someone is experiencing violence or threats. The first one is a protection order. And in Canada, a protection order is a court order. It's made by a judge, and it's made in situations where one person needs protection from another. And so it puts in place conditions that will help to limit contact between those people. And those conditions can include things like no contact or limiting communication, requirements to stay away from a home or a workplace or a school. There can also be conditions limiting phone calls, texts, or emails, and conditions preventing harassment or intimidation. And in BC, there are two main types of protection orders. So you have a peace bond and a family law protection order. And a peace bond is issued by the police. This is something that anyone can get if they go to the police. You don't need a lawyer, and there's no cost associated with it. And a protection order in family law, you can apply for in the courts, and you can either do that on its own, or often it comes up during the course of family proceedings when there's a separation or a child custody issue that's already being dealt with. You can have one or both of these orders, and generally they're going to be effective for about a year from the date that they're made. That's the time period that has been imposed on them. I think they may be for a shorter duration, and you can always renew it for a longer period, but generally it's recognized that if somebody is experiencing harm at the hands of another person, that's not going to be solved overnight. There needs to be time to limit contact between those two people. It's a serious matter to have a peace bond or a protection order in place, and the conditions are meant to be taken seriously by the person who they are against. But by the same token, it's only an order. It's only a piece of paper. And so it's the fear of consequences that has to stop the person from their actions. If someone feels immediately unsafe, they can also call the police. And police can respond immediately. They can remove that person from the situation or investigate and lay charges if there is an offense. And they can also connect individuals to victim services. So people might be afraid to call the police. They may feel like it's overreacting. They may feel like they will face consequences. But if there's a threat of immediate harm, it is much better to call the police and have them remove the other party from that situation. For a protection order or a peace bond, it could be by mail, usually. It could also be in a courthouse, depending on what stage the proceedings are at. If a person doesn't present to court, there can be all kinds of consequences. There can be costs against them. There can be a finding of contempt. So it really depends on what stage the proceedings are at. But judges take it very seriously when somebody doesn't show up to court. Across Canada, there are a number of shelters and transitional homes, and these are meant to provide safe, secure, confidential spaces, usually for women and children to stay in during times of extreme stress. So during times when they are leaving a relationship, they are fleeing from somebody who has been causing harm to them. And support workers at these places can provide safety planning, court accompaniment, emotional support, as well as access to legal aid and community resources. Oftentimes there's no charge associated with these, and the support workers can help financially as well and point out resources that people can access to help get them back on their feet. There are also in BC victim services programs. And these are programs that can help people with understanding the court process. So if they're going through it, maybe they don't have a lawyer and they need somebody to just help them understand it. It can provide access on court dates and updates on what that date means and what you have to do, information on your rights, as well as healing and support options. So sometimes there can be financial compensation for things like counseling or medical needs if people have medical issues or mental health issues that they're dealing with during these times. So I think it's really important to know that no one has to go through this alone and that there are resources available. And a lot of these resources are available 24 hours a day for people who need them. I don't think this is a new problem by any stretch. It's just that we're giving language to it for the first time. Like before, intimate partner violence or gender-based violence, it often happened behind closed doors. There was so much shame and stigma attached to it. People didn't want to speak out. They were worried about what people would think of them if they spoke out. And now we have language for this. We recognize that it's wrong, and we recognize that violence can come in so many different forms. So I do think that there is a growing awareness that this has always been a problem. And now we're trying to actually give people space to have their stories heard and to give them solutions for these problems. But it is such a problem in Canada. There was a recent report from the government ombudsperson, who is a person that's meant to help people when they're not getting the supports that they need. And it has highlighted a number of changes that have to happen to our government supports to increase supports for people who have been victims of gender-based violence, because we're still not doing enough. But that being said, I think there are some really great resources. The challenge is getting the information to people, because they may be in a situation where they can't be looking online and they can't ask people and they don't know what supports are out there. So just providing that information is, I think, the first step in many instances. Let's talk about how gender-based violence intersects with immigration status, because I think that something is at the forefront for so many people, is that if I report this violence, if I report what I've been going through, then it's going to impact my ability to stay in Canada. It's going to impact my immigration status. And it's really important to know a few key things. The first is that your safety comes first. Your safety is paramount. And immigration status does not prevent someone from getting protection from the police, from getting shelter support, police support, or victim services support. That is something that is guaranteed to everybody in Canada, regardless of their immigration status. And if someone is experiencing abuse, there might be pathways to apply for permanent residence on humanitarian grounds. A question that a lot of people have is, if they came to Canada through spousal sponsorship and they are experiencing violence in that relationship, do they have to stay in that relationship because of the sponsorship? And there are options to remain in Canada even if spousal sponsorship ends because of an abuse or the relationship ends because of abuse. So whether you are a permanent resident or you have a temporary status, you still have options and you don't have to stay in an abusive relationship just because you're concerned about your immigration status. There are options to apply for a temporary residence permit sometimes. Individuals experiencing abuse can apply for a TRP or a temporary resident permit, which gives temporary lawful status as well as access to things like healthcare. And it's really important that people are aware that reporting violence to the police does not trigger immigration consequences automatically. Legal professionals, support workers, they can assist without contacting immigration authorities unless absolutely required. And oftentimes reports to people like the police, for instance, are made in confidence. So knowing your rights is so important. It can be extremely empowering, especially when fear of deportation is used as a tool of control. You don't have other support networks here, the threat of deportation can be a really powerful tool. And the person who has been the victim of violence, often they're isolated, they may not speak English, they may not have access to their legal documents, their passport, things like that. They may not have access to money. And so they believe it when this person says, if you tell anyone, if you try to get help, you'll be deported. And they're too afraid to come forward and find out if that's actually true or if there are other options available to them. But there are amazing support workers who work in this space who can walk people through the process and figure out what options might be available to them. Confidentiality is so crucial because, again, I think people are so worried that who's going to become aware of this information? If I report to the police, does it automatically go to all of these other people? And it doesn't. Not necessarily. There are situations where immigration status does become relevant, but there are lots of situations where it's not. When children are involved, situations can become even that much more overwhelming for people who are trying to leave an abusive relationship. And so the first thing to know is that in Canada, the best interests of the child are the first consideration. So Canadian courts make decisions on what is safest and healthiest for the children who are involved. And that includes looking at whether they have been exposed to violence, looking at their emotional safety, looking at things like stability and routine, and each parent's ability to care for that child. That's really important. Experiencing violence does not automatically mean that somebody will lose custody of their children or will lose parenting time. The courts will always look at parenting arrangements and say what is in the best interest of the child. And so they may impose conditions to keep parents and children safe, and these can include things like supervised visits, safe exchange locations where maybe parents who have been in an abusive relationship need to be in a public space, need to have supervision to hand over the children so they're not alone, and also no contact conditions between parents. And courts will look at the history of the relationship. They will look at things like police records, protection order records. They will look at reports from social workers who may have been involved, statements from doctors or other professionals involved with the family, and they will also look at evidence of threats, coercion, or unsafe behavior, and that can take all kinds of forms. Oftentimes it's about people telling their stories, sometimes it's about text messages or emails or social media messages. There are all kinds of things that the courts will look at and consider. And it's important to note that there is support for survivors. There's support for parents and for children going through custody arrangements and court proceedings. There are duty counsel in courthouses. Legal aid is available for some people to understand their rights or to navigate the court process. And a lot of organizations will offer free legal clinics for people who have experienced violence as well. Unfortunately, women are, I think, the most impacted group, but men can be the victims of gender-based violence or other forms of abuse or coercive control. You often see relationships, same-sex relationships as well, where one partner is abusing another or violent against another. So it's not limited to women. Women are, unfortunately, just the most impacted group. This problem does not recognize your age, your background, your social status, your gender, any of that. I mean, it can impact anybody, unfortunately, and I think there is so much extra stigma that is associated when people are male or a member of the LGBTQ plus community, or their cultural background has told them that they need to just put up with this and deal with it. I mean, there's so many different factors that come into play. But it's true, gender-based violence can impact everybody, and everybody has the right to the same supports to live free of this violence. A few final reminders for people. I think first and foremost, you have the right to be safe. You can seek help without fear of losing your children or losing your status in Canada. There are legal systems, shelters, and community organizations that are there to support you and provide you with education and with an understanding of what your options are. And reaching out to professionals, although it can be intimidating and it can be scary, people like lawyers or social workers or settlement workers, these folks can help you understand your options. They really are there to work for you and understand what you're dealing with and help you through that process. And then if you or anyone you know is in immediate danger, I think it's really important to seek help right away. And so you can do this by contacting emergency services at 911. There's also a program in BC called Victim Link BC, and this is a government-funded program. It's a toll-free, multilingual service. It's available 24 hours a day across BC to anyone seeking crisis support, and this can be accessed by calling or texting 1-800-563-0808, or you can send an email to them at 211-victimlinkbc@uwbc.ca, and that's an excellent resource to help people understand what options are available to them.